Turbulence in the Northeast once again casts a spotlight on ceasefire agreements stitched with a myriad of insurgent groups operating in the region. In particular, the Naga Peace Accord, which now enters its 25th year starting this August, comes to mind. Joining us today is perhaps the best person to discuss some of the trials and tribulations when it comes to this region. It is a pleasure to introduce Mr. Jaideep Saikia, who is an expert on security issues in the Northeast. He has previously served as an expert on the Northeast in the National Security Council's secretariat. Mr. Saikia, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ishan. It's a great honor for me to be in conversation with you and this particular important subject of the Northeast security situation and a somewhat focused overview of the peace processes. If I can sort of give you a presentation, a brief one, by way of a little history. So this is, of course, a dedicated presentation for the global order, and I thought I'll begin with this very interesting or enigmatic photograph of this particular person in olive green fatigue with a weapon, with a telescopic side weapon, who is aiming at the distance. Now I call it enigmatic because he could be insurgent, and he could be sort of training his weapon at the rest of India, which there are myriad groups in the Northeast doing so at this point of time. But at the same time, he could be an Indian army man pointing his weapon at the Northeast, which there is a lot of deployment of the Indian Army in the Northeast, and there are special acts like the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, the Disturbed Area Acts, which in recent times, especially after the Mon incident of 4 December 2021, when the Indian Army personnel, perhaps in the case of mistaken identity, killed many Konyak tribal people from the Mon district of Nagaland, and that has sort of created a huge furor, which is yet to sort of die down. So, my question is that, yes, Northeast is the frontier, and when I say distant frontier, the name of my brief presentation here by way of introduction, frontiers are distant. But in my scheme of things, I think, Ishan, I think, the quest should be for a proximate frontier, to bring the enchanted frontiers that make up the Northeast closer to the heartland, closer to New Delhi, which governs it. For those of you, of course, I'm sure your enlightened viewers know where Northeast is located. But just a slide to show you where the Northeast is there. That is the Northeast for you, which is very far away from where Delhi governs, or the rest of India. As a matter of fact, I sometimes I'm surprised when people from rest of India ask whether Northeast is part of India or not. Sometimes they consider it to be an outland, perhaps even an expanse which does not belong to India. It's also the case that a lot of Northeasterners consider not to be a part of the greater Indian dream. Now that's unfortunate. I think there has to be a little more a resolute effort from both the ends, Northeast and the rest of India, so that Northeast becomes a able partner in the nation building exercise that India is continuing to embark upon.
Of course.
But the geography is such, Ishan, that the Northeast has its international borders with 5 countries, making it perhaps the most strategically placed expanse in the entire South Asia. It is surrounded by China, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal, placed a little further afield, connecting it to the rest of India only by a tenuous corridor called the Siliguri corridor. That's 2% of land which connects Northeast with the rest of India. So that's geography for you, which partition ordained in such so. So when people of the rest of India consider it to be an outland of sorts, I don't think they're too wrong, incorrect about this aspect. But emotional and such other integration has been sought to be incorporated and embarked upon by New Delhi, but the process is an exercise in progression, in progress, and I'm sure a day will come when the Northeast will become truly an integrated one. But at this point of time, I would like to talk about the peace processes that have sort of been embarked upon in the Northeast, because with the coming of independence, Northeast, because of the loss of the Tibetan buffer, became a defense zone. Loss of the Tibetan buffer in the sense like when China invaded Tibet,
Yes.
the loss of the Tibetan buffer made willy-nilly the Northeast into a defense zone. Its fragile garrison expands with acts like the Armed Forces Special Powers Act and the Disturbed Areas Act. So myriad insurgencies. And you can see from the map that it is so strategically encircled that anti-India individual powers have tried to fish in troubled waters and sort of even sever it from the rest of India on many an occasion. That's strategic encirclement for you. Let's begin at the beginning and talk about how insurgency began before we get into the nitty-gritties and discuss about the peace process. This gentleman is Angami Zapu Fizo, the father of Northeast insurgency. He's the one who actually began the Naga insurgency, and he's no more. But he actually gave rise to the Naga insurgency, which continues to fester till this very day. And he got a lot of aid from the outlands. I'll just show you a slide, the sort of route which these people took to Yunnan in China for training, for arms, for safe haven, for indoctrination. You went through Nagaland, you can see that in the map, went through the then Northeast Frontier Agency. The waypoint was Khonsa in the district of Tirap and Changlang, and through Myanmar to terrain like this one, very inhospitable. These are some rare photographs I'm showing you of the Naga armed rebels going to Yunnan on foot. And the present General Secretary of the NSC and IM, that's National Socialist Council of Nagaland, Isaac Muiva, was part of the first batch of Nagas who went to China in 1967 and met up with the Chinese leaders. The trek to Yunnan, as I said, was by Muiva and self-styled Brigadier Hinosari Keho. They reached Yunnan in January 1967. And I just want to give a quick quote from a very interesting book, which I think your viewers would want to sort of go to at one point of time. It's by Nirmal Libadon, called Nagaland, the Night of the Guerrillas. A quick excerpt from that is very interesting. They were surrounded by tall Chinese soldiers, Nirmal Libadon, the author, says. He's no more, but I think this is one of the finest chronicles of Naga insurgency. We're talking about that. They were surrounded by tall Chinese soldiers. We have come from Nagaland for training. Your leaders know about our coming. The Chinese received them as credentials was checked. Someone remarked, "How can a short man fight a mighty nation like India?" Self-styled Major Tang Tiao looked back defiantly. He was only 5 feet tall. But the fact of the matter is, Muiva left for the Peking School of Diplomacy soon after, and over 4 Naga batches or gangs, as a whole, were trained by the Chinese. But the most important thing, Ishan, is that 54 years have passed since the first batch reached China, and that interesting, anecdote, or rather dialogue between the Chinese soldier and self-styled Major Tang Tiao, who was derided for being just 5 foot tall, and asked, how can you fight a mighty nation like India? 54 years have passed since then, and we are nowhere near resolution. So I wanted to give that particular excerpt,
Really puts it into context.
a sense of how aspects are. Now, this is very rare and a very interesting photograph. It shows the Naga leadership in the Great Wall of China in 1968. That's Isaac Chisisu, the president, who is no more, but his name continues to be in the, they call it the NSCN-IM, because NSCN, Isaac Chisisu and Muiva. And the other person is Muiva, who in 68 was a youngster, but now he's 80 plus. But he is a Naga from Manipur. He's not a Naga from Nagaland present territory. It's also important to understand that the NSCN-IM has completed 24 years of ceasefire, and this year, on the 1st of August, it will complete its 25th year. And although there was some movement towards a resolution with the earlier dispensation, but a lot of things have cleared the pitch in recent times. Over 90 rounds of talks have taken place without much headway, or any headway really. And the most important thing, Ishan, is that the onlooking Indian insurgent groups, the IIGs, are getting wary about the delay, because they say that if the most important group, insurgent group of the region, the Naga insurgent group, have not been able to be resolved, we will be caught in the traffic jam. So that is why they have not got into a dialogue process with the government of India. That's one of the reasons. We don't want to be caught up in a traffic jam for the next 25 years. If they can't solve this problem with the most important group, what will happen to groups like the Alpha? But NSCN-IM, and it has, I'll come to that later, has now come inside Nagaland, and they're running a parallel government with extortion, taxation, recruitment, arms procurement without any Latin hindrance. And the IM budget was a whopping 620 crore. I do not have the latest budget, which I think was announced 2021, but the earlier one had a whopping 620 crore, which doubled since 2015. So you can see the sort of how they tax the innocent Naga population, despite the fact that there is a cessation of hostilities. And they're indulging in gun running, the nexus with China, and they're arming and training other militant groups in the region. And they're intruding into Naga-dominated areas of Assam, Manipur, which is a special case. If you want to ask me the question, I will talk about why it is special, and Arunachal Pradesh. I have gone out with the Assam Rifles on patrols in Arunachal Pradesh, particularly in the districts of Tirap and Changlang, which is the way that NSCN-IM is trying to intrude into these areas is by trying to convert the animistic tribes, primarily the Wanchus and the Noctes of Tirap and Changlang, into Christianity. And that is why they named the entire exercise of Operation Salvation. So that's a very interesting way that they're trying to get into it. I allude to the film Braveheart. I'm sure your viewers must have seen it, played by Mel Gibson, when the King of England is trying to conquer Scotland. And a very interesting dialogue between the King of England and his generals. He says, if you cannot win them out, breed them out. So a lot of intermarriages are taking place between the Nagas and the Wanchus and the Noctes. And when one of the patrols I went to it with the SAM rifles, I went to a village, and I was talking to the Raja or the Gaobura or the headman of the village, and he had 5 daughters, and suddenly one person comes in to his headman's hut, singing Christian hymns, and then I asked him, "Who are you?" He is a Naga from the Mon district, and he has come after having been educated at the University of Delhi. He has come to sort of convert the tribes of Arunachal Pradesh, particularly Tirap and Changlang, into Christianity, and he married the 6 daughters of the Raja, of the headman. So, I get this allusion to Mel Gibson's film to show that, if you cannot win them out, breed them out. So that's a very interesting way that they're trying to sort of, in the quest for greater Nagaland, as it were. Some of you who have not visited that, people of Nagaland or the entire Northeast are very, 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 very straightforward, innocent people. And here's a picture of a Naga lady, and the British actually left them to their own devices because they didn't want to sort of control them, primarily because there was no commerce there, so they called it the excluded or partially excluded area. But with the coming of independence, Assam was a mother state, Nagaland was a district of Assam, as was Mizoram, as was Meghalaya, as was Arunachal Pradesh. And I think the chauvinistic Assamese character, and I am an Assamese, I point fingers at myself also. The fact of the matter is, I think, you alienated this tribal community, and that's why they broke away one by one and what it made constituted different states. As a matter of fact, in recent times, you might have heard, or your viewers might have heard about how the Assam police and the Assam Mizoram police fought, and there was a huge gunfight where 10 Assamese policemen were killed by the Mizo policemen. That's perhaps one of the few rarest of occasions where in the world where police forces of the same countries fire at each other, periodically battle each other. But of late, I think the Chief Minister of Assam has reached out to the other states, and there is a give and take approach by which sentiments are being tried to sort of be assuaged. The peace process, as far as the Naga peace process is concerned, which I will sort of delve with before I get into a conversation with you, I'll just show you 1 or 2 slides before I get into the conversation, is that the peace process so far began with a 9-point agreement, Sir Akbar, Haidari, and the NNC in 1995, and there was a 16-point agreement in 1960. The Shillong Accord, which was a historic one in 1975, which they almost got into a resolution, and that agreed to sort of, to a lot of things, including autonomy and stuff like that. But groups broke away. You see, here I must talk about the way New Delhi tries to govern the Northeast, which I have tried to show you cartographically, that how far it is from rest of India, and New Delhi particularly. Of course. Sort of take recourses to the old Kautilyan stratagem outlined in Chanakya's Arthashastra, which is Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed. Sam is, of course, cajolement. You cajole a party, a belligerent party, to come over to your side. And Dam is you bribe him, by saying, well, do this, and we will just forget your belligerent stance and come over. We'll give you X amount of his money or seat of governance. And Sam and Dam, a combination of this, was actually felt when the Mizo National Front came over ground. They came over ground for Christ and God and country. But the fact of the matter is, there was a combination of Sam and Dam. And then you have Dand. or punitive action. A belligerent group which doesn't fall in line, you sort of use the security forces, the armed forces, the Indian army against it, and then bhed, you divide. So combination of these four interesting stratagems, which have been talked about by Kautilya in Arthashastra, Tam Dam Dandabhed. You cajole, you bribe, you utilize punitive action, or you divide him so that he is no longer a cohesive entity. And that's been seen particularly Bhed, the division in the case of the Nagas. Nagas are now almost 6 factions. I mean, after the 75 Accord, which I'm showing you on the slide, the Shillong Accord, it is sort of, broken up into first NSCN, and then NSCN broke into 2, NSCN IM and NSCN Kaplang, and over the years it has gone into sort of breaking up into, now I think you have 6 factions, and that is the way the Indian state tries to sort of govern the Northeast and control the peace processes and things like that. I do not wish to make a value judgment as to whether this strategy is correct or not, but the fact of the matter is, in most cases, the peace processes have actually been stymied by this sort of thing, And I think of late, New Delhi has realized that...
You mean stymied by the factionalism, or just to be clear?
Sorry?
I'm sorry, do you mean stymied by the factionalism between the groups?
Well, no, I mean, stymied by the factionalism in the sense, yes. Okay. I mean, when you divide a particular faction into, different groups, I mean, you try to sort of, for instance, NSCN immediately after the Shillong Accord was won, then it broke away into 2. That, of course, is because of, faction rivalry. Indian state had nothing to do with that. But then various agencies of the Indian state, because there are hardliners within a particular faction, then you sort of try to sort of use every trick in the book to sort of bring him over, so that the hardliner it becomes a little weak. So naturally, it's stymied in that sense.
Okay.
One group comes for talk, but the other guy continues to be in the jungle. So that's how. So Bhed, which I was talking about, one of the strategies which are applied, is being applied. But what happens in the end, Ishan, is that you don't have a comprehensive solution. In the case of the United Liberation Front of Assam, for instance, you have a pro-talk group and you have an independent group. The most important leader of the Alpha, Parish Borwa, continues to be in Yunnan, in China. And despite various attempts to reach out to him, he's of course very, very belligerent. But the fact of the matter is that division has been made, and this was a very deliberate move on the part of the Indian state, that hardliners who are not willing to play a game, they can stay away, they can do whatever they want. But we will break the mother group, so that they cannot disturb the law and order situation in the region with impunity. I think that is perhaps the real catchword here. In any sense, the Shillong Accord failed because it was non-inclusive. When we are still with the Naga aspect, we must say that Nagas, the 16 plus tribes, they were never one, you see. The Nagas, the Aos, the Angamis, the Hemis, the other tribes, they met only to fight each other during the headhunting days.
Of course.
So it's only after independence and the attempts of the missionaries, when Christianity came and they converted to Christianity, that somewhat of a loose federation of Naga community came into being, as it were, and a former Prime Minister, Devagowda, talked about the unique history of Nagaland, which really set the entire thing moving. I don't think there was a unique history of Nagaland, if you ask me, because they were entities onto themselves, and they could not even speak to each other. They now have a dialect called Nagami, which is the language the Assamese people like us speak, and a kind of a pidgin form of Assamese. They call it the Nagami. That's how various tribes speak to each other. So it was not inclusive anyway. But the fact of the matter is, NSA is talking about a greater Nagaland, which not only includes these 16 tribes, but tribes who have affiliation with the Naga identity, which is formed over a period of time and which spills over to other states like Assam, Manipur, and Arunachal Pradesh. I told you how they're trying to sort of, get into Arunachal Pradesh.
Assimilate other groups.
Yeah. So, so NSA certainly, because it is a Tangkhul party in many ways, does not represent all the Nagas. And the grant of autonomy tomorrow, if the government of India would grant them a shared sovereignty or autonomy of some music, I think it'll eventually lead to a civil war. Because I said that, the beginning was that they met only to fight. As a matter of fact, in my book Frontier in Flames, which was inaugurated by B.G. Verghese in 2008 in the India Habitat Center, in my foreword, I wrote that there was one single day when all the tribes would meet and cry over each other's shoulders, as it were, to mark the passage of a particularly bloody year. Otherwise, they only met to fight, the headhunting tribes that they were. And in 2015, this particular government, Narendra Modi's government, went in for a historic, within inverted commas, framework agreement, which was nothing really much. It was shrouded in secrecy, and it has failed in a way. But the fact of the matter is, I think it was done because Ajak Sisi, which photograph I showed you in the Great Wall of China, was in his deathbed in the ICU, and they wanted a signature in the agreement so as to make it little inclusive, because Ajak Sisi is a Sema from the present territory of Nagaland, and as I said, NACNI was getting to be identified more with the Tangkhul, of which Muiwa is a member. But Tangkhuls are from Manipur. They're Nagas of Manipur, not from the present, geographical territory of Nagaland. So that was a problem. I think they wanted a framework agreement because, as I said, Ajay Sisi was on his deathbed, and they wanted a signature to make it a little more inclusive. But because if it was historic, it should have been announced to the entire Indian public and to everybody. But it was shrouded in secrecy, and it didn't work. So much so that the framework agreement, there is a photograph of Muiwa in Narendra Modi with Race Course Road next to then Home Minister Rajnath Singh, the NSA, Ms. Doval, and R.N. Ravi, the architect of the framework agreement, who was also the interlocutor for talks, and later on he was made the governor of Nagaland. And Ishan, I must tell you, if you ask me pointedly, what are the stumbling blocks? Of course, the insistence of a separate flag, a separate constitution, and the inclusion of the Naga included dominated areas of Assam, Manipur, and Arunachal Pradesh, which are the important constituents. But negotiations were going apace, and I believe R.S. Pandey, who was the earlier interlocutor during the UPA regime, this, according to Mr. G.K. Pillai, the former Union Home Secretary, in conversation with me, said that they almost agreed on a separate flag. But what is a flag? After all, it's like a flag of a club, whether in any state. It doesn't really give them a separate identity, as long as they sort of abide by the Indian Constitution. There were, of course, problems with a separate constitution, and certainly with the fact that they wanted the inclusion of territories dominated by the Nagas in Manipur, Assam, and Arunachal Pradesh, particularly Manipur, because in 2001, when there was this absurd agreement that there would be an extension of the ceasefire without territorial limits, Assam, because of its chauvinistic nature, the NSA and IM wanted only two tribal districts of Assam, namely Karbi Anglong and Dima Hasao. So it didn't really raise the tempers among the chauvinistic Asmis community, Guwahati and thereabouts. But Manipur, the valley burned. The Manipur assembly was burned to the ground. And, I still remember the speaker of Manipur because I had flown in to Delhi for a conference and he was lying on the ground, all burned. And, it was mayhem in the valley. So you cannot ever countenance a measure by which, Naga-dominated areas of Manipur particularly would be given to a great Nagaland. But, as I said, Mr. Muiba is from Manipur. He is from Ukhrul. His village is Somdal, which is inside Manipur. Now, like Napoleon, who was a Corsican, he was not from, mainland France, as it were. Now, to prove himself to be an emperor, he had to do a little extra, right?
Of course.
So Mr. Muiba can't go back to his parish, to his constituency, say that I've been, fighting and struggling all these years, but I have not been able to get my homeland into this greater Nagaland concept. That would be suicidal for him, Ishan. So, we have to sort of, understand that aspect. These are the three important stumbling blocks, but also I think, two unfortunate incidents happened. One was the abrogation of Article 370 from Jammu Kashmir and the creation of the two Union territories, and which raised fears of the Naga people that even if we were to grant it autonomy, what stops New Delhi from taking it away? The manner in which it was taken away from Jammu Kashmir, A. And B, I think the appointment of this gentleman, Mr. R.N. Ravi, who was also the chairman of the Joint Intelligence Committee and also the interlocutor. An interlocutor, by definition, has to be a very unbiased person. But he was appointed a governor and he started making statements which were not very palatable for the NSA and IM. And talks just broke down and a stalemate sort of resulted. That's really the way it sort of went. This is R.N. Ravi with me. He was a special director in the Intelligence Bureau and he was in the SAM, so I know him particularly well, very well-meaning officer. Now he's a governor of Tamil Nadu, but his exit from Nagaland was rather ignominious in that sense, and that was touted as a victory for the NSA and IM. And you see, the framework agreement has been criticized. These are the fine prints I've taken from news media, and really wrapped up in an enigma, and it really didn't work. A fresh beginning has been made, and that is why I'm saying that the intention of New Delhi is perhaps good, because they removed R.N. Ravi after the NSA and I said that we were not going to talk to this gentleman. So I think, we cannot point fingers at New Delhi and say that, well, despite the four stratagems I'm talking about, Sam, Dam, Dandabhed, there is, I think, bona fide intention on the part of New Delhi to settle the peace process. So a fresh beginning has been made, a new interlocutor has been appointed, and let's see how it works. Can we go back to face-to-face now?
Sure.
Sharing.
Mr. Saikia, thank you very much. That was most comprehensive. And I would also like to point out that Mr. Saikia actually contributed an in-detail critique of the Naga Peace Accord, appropriately titled Talking to Belligerents, on our platform, which I will of course link to this video. Now, so you have when it comes to the Naga Accords specifically, you've described a long and arduous post-ceasefire process that, in your opinion, could have been wholly unnecessary, provided certain factors had been paid attention to in the pre-ceasefire stage. And this is something that you have emphasized. What, in your opinion, did the center not take into consideration, and why, perhaps?
Well, the most important thing is that, you see, and let me just give you an instance from the Naga peace process, because since I have already given an introduction, it might be for the ease of understanding for your viewers. After years of struggle, or being in the jungle, as it were, they call it oaking, the mobile headquarters, the NSCN. Naturally, after a point of time, as I said, a combination of cajolement, trying to bring them over by way of bribery. Bribery doesn't sort of entail money. To be saying that, well, you come and govern, the way Lal Lenga came and became the chief minister of Mizoram. And now his second in command, Zoramthanga, is, even as I speak to you, is the chief minister of Mizoram. But he was a militant, he was an insurgent once. And he went out to take help from groups and countries like China and then East Pakistan. So what I'm trying to say is that after a point of time, battle fatigue sets in. So a group shows interest in coming over ground. Naturally, the Indian state has agencies which keeps tabs of these things. But the fact of the matter is, the pre-ceasefire stage, I think, is very important. A lot of work, back channeling, secret parleys, entry or exit of the agencies, etc. Meeting in a third country. For instance, the Nagas met our external agencies, like the Research and Analysis Wing and the Intelligence Bureau in Western Europe, in Netherlands, etc. And most of the aspects should have been trashed out. What would be the give and take? I think New Delhi made a few seminal mistakes, and the most important thing is that in its bid to sort of proclaim to the rest of the country, for various reasons, including political ones, maybe election in a very important state like UP. Now, as a matter of fact, we are going into elections in UP. It has to make some announcements to show that yes, governance is going up well. So you are in a bit of a hurry to sort of anvil the peace process without going to aspects which might actually at a later stage stymie these things, or wreck things, as has happened in the case of the NSCN. And I told by a very senior general of the Indian Army, retired, that when Mr. R.N. Ravi was made the governor, his first gubernatorial announcement was that he will solve the Naga problem in 6 months. Now, where in 6 months? And he wrecked the entire thing, and when he had to make a quick exit. So what I'm trying to tell you, Ishan, is the pre-ceasefire stage is very important. Let it take long. Let it go on to even 5 to 10 years if necessary. But much of the aspects which would sort of come into play once the ceasefire is signed, and then you have a proper comprehensive resolution, has to be quick. Because the moment you announce that the cessation of hostilities is taking place, there will be spoilers aplenty. And as I said, the geography of northeast India, and I've shown you the map, the strategic encirclement, the inimical forces will try and fish in troubled waters and naturally wreck, throw the spanner into the works as far as the peace process is concerned. They don't want a stable India. And Northeast is perhaps because of geography, because of, they came in to be a part of the political entity that the Indian state is, only in 1826 with the entry of the British. And British only because of commerce, oil, tea, and gold. And much of these hill districts or the tribal areas like Nagaland, the Britishers excluded them or partially excluded them because they did not come under the commercial ambit. You see, they didn't see any commerce there. They just simply sent expeditionary forces to sort of quell rebellion when they used to come, when the Naga tribes would come down to the tea gardens of Assam to sort of, raid them and all things like that. But they left them to their own devices. Pandit Nehru also followed the same principle, really. But after some time, when belligerence grew because of, as I said, Piso, the father of Naga insurgency, had his so-called training with an inverted commas in Myanmar, then Burma. Naturally, for a variety of reasons, including the fact that the Britishers, before they left the shores of India, wanted to sort of convert the expanse, or at least the hill districts of northeast, present-day northeast, and the tribal areas of Burma into a crown colony, the infamous coup plan. So these things gave rise to the fact that they had a different identity altogether, which doesn't sort of converge with the Indian identity, which continues to be an identity in progress, even as I speak. But assimilation with the Assam, which had a modicum of Sanskritization, made it come closer to the Indian identity. But the Nagas, the Mizos, the Khasis, etc., they were a little away. And Christianity, of course, added to the fact that, there were religious differences also that took them away from the integration process. What I'm trying to say is that pre-ceasefire stage is very important that way. Because the moment you announce a ceasefire, there will be spoilers aplenty. So the best way would be to play by the book and have things thrashed out before the ceasefire, and then announce a ceasefire, and then quickly go into resolution, like the way it happened in the Mizo National Front instance. And then, everything was hunky-dory. Back to you, Ishan.
So, colloquially speaking, play the long game, almost. So, you have also questioned the wisdom of the secrecy around the framework agreement, which is now entering its 7th year. And you've also described a chain of events that have triggered as a result, not the least being the former governor and Ravi becoming a casualty of these different factions, in a manner of speaking, and the ramifications perhaps even going beyond Naga groups. You've described Ulfa suddenly getting involved in territory where they would not have thought to be so before. So you seem to suggest that even China has started to take advantage of this turn. So what, in your opinion, have the consequences been, and how does a foreign power here take advantage of this fallout?
That's a very interesting question, Ishan. Yes, naturally, India-China rivalry is nothing new. Naturally, these two great Asian giants have been at loggerheads since the unfortunate war of 1962. And we have seen in 2020 how Eastern Ladakh and Galwan, and before that, Doklam happened. Now, as a result, this is my theory, and maybe it's far-fetched in some way, but I'll articulate it nonetheless. I think the humiliation which China faced in Eastern Galwan, they did not sort of bargain for the way we would sort of, be able to sort of extricate them from the way they were trying to sort of intrude into areas which were rightfully ours in Eastern Ladakh, in Galwan area. I don't want to go into details for the positive time, but they didn't bargain for that. So, having learned a lesson from the humiliation, as it were, they are now trying to sort of, engineer a different sort of a war in the eastern extremities of the country, that is northeast. We call it the eastern sector because the India-China boundary is divided into the western sector, which comprised, let's say, the eastern Ladakh. There's a central sector, and then there's a very most contentious sector, which is the eastern sector, which basically is the Arunachal Pradesh Tibet border. Now, China of late is propping up the insurgent groups of the region, and we have seen the attacks which have been taking place against the Indian Army and the security forces. The 4th of December 2021, when PLA Manipur and the Manipur Naga People's Federation attacked the Assam Rifles in November 2021, and we've seen the Mon incident in December. These are manifestation of this proxy war that the Red Dragon, that China is trying to sort of use, because they don't want to sort of face to face with the Indian Army directly, because they realize that it's not 2021 or 2022, it's not 1962 anymore. We are far better prepared, and we have our formations, Indian Army formations in place. So they're trying a different kind of deployment pattern altogether, which is this proxy war. So naturally, when they see that the NSA-NIM dialogue process has broken down for internal reasons, and I'm not blaming anybody, but the fact of the matter is I don't understand as to why, if the framework agreement was signed and New Delhi sort of was accommodative about it, because IHX, as I said, was on his deathbed, and they wanted an all-inclusive Naga community, because IHX was a SEMA, and they didn't want NSA and IM to be identified as a Thankul party only, which naturally a lot of people thought it was, because the General Secretary Muiba is Thankul. But the fact of the matter is, I don't understand as to why Mr. R.N. Ravi, who was the interlocutor, and the description of the interlocutor, at least in my lexicon, is one who is unbiased, who brings two warring parties to the table and brings about an atmosphere which is absolutely unadulterated, so that they can talk and talk about the various modalities. He was made the governor. The governor is a constitutional authority, and he started making statements which, as I said, did not go down well with the NSA. He called them, I think something to the effect like they are a band of, extortionists and things like that. So naturally, there was no reason why the NSA would want to talk with a biased interlocutor in that sense, you see. And as a result, what has happened? There was an ignominious exit of Mr. R.N. Ravi. He had to be the thing, and there's been tom-tommed as a victory of the NSA and IM against a great Indian nation. Now, China has been observing these aspects quite closely because of what it has been its primal objective about fishing in troubled waters, and along with this all-weather ally, the Inter-Services Intelligence of Pakistan, who's hell-bent on sort of raising 1,000 prairie fires which India cannot douse, or even sort of cutting India with 1,000 cuts. That's the famous adage which they were talking about. So they have got into a kind of a nexus, and they have said that, well, since the Naga talks are failing, it's something to be rejoiced about. So naturally they'll try and muddy the water a little more. How did they do it? In my assessment, I think they propped up these insurgent groups like the PLA Manipur. Now Manohar Mayum, the commander-in-chief of PLA Manipur, is sitting in Yunnan. He's almost a Chinese agent by all standards. So he's been trained, chaperoned by the Chinese intelligence agency, the Ministry of State Security, and this attack on the 46 Assam Rifles, which happened in November, killing the commanding officer and the 4-year-old child of Colonel Viplav Tripathi. and his wife and many other Jawans of the 46th Assam Rifles. So that was a dastardly, barbaric act. Earlier, we have never had, Northeast insurgent groups targeting non-combatants. But this time it was I think some of the insurgent groups which had earlier, kept a little an ethical aside. For instance, the NSA never did any operation on Sundays. Sundays being a Sabbath as far as the Christian religion is concerned, and they never targeted non-combatants or civilians. But things have changed over the years, perhaps because a country like China, which is absolutely anti-India in its innards, have actually pushed them to the brink.
You also described Myanmar's U-turn post-coup when it came to perhaps the PLA in Manipur operating out of its territory and connected to perhaps some of these issues. So, and almost threatening India's neighborhood first policy in a way. Could you perhaps describe that in some detail too?
Yes, I think that's again a very important and a very pertinent question, particularly because on the 1st of February this year, that's 2022, we'll complete 1 year of military takeover in Myanmar.
Right.
On the 1st of February 2021, perhaps because of the growing popularity of Aung San Suu Kyi, the state councillor who had won huge majority in the last elections. Her National League for Democracy, and she as of course the leader of NLD, got a huge majority. I think that raised the fear of the most important stakeholder in Myanmar, which is the Myanmar's army, of the Tamado. Now, Senior General Mong Ang Ling, I think, harbors ambitions of becoming the president of Myanmar. So they went in for a putsch. They went in for a coup d'etat, imprisoned Aung San Suu Kyi because he won such a great mandate. And on the 1st of February 2021, they went in for military rule. They took over the reins of governance. A couple of things happened as a result of that. There was protest, huge protest all over, which continues to rage even as I speak. There was a government in exile, the NUG, National Unity Government, which is somewhere in Chiang Mai in Thailand, not really disclosed. Aung San Suu Kyi is in house arrest. She's been imprisoned and she's been sentenced to many years of imprisonment. Now, for some reason or the other, earlier on, things were going quite well and we had requested them. I myself was part of the track to dialogue with Myanmar in 2014. A very high-powered committee along with the contingent, along with D. Parthasarathi, who was, if you remember, a special envoy of Mrs. Gandhi, a very, very, very senior foreign service officer. And there was a former army commander, Lieutenant General Parnaik of the Northern Command, some of us. I was the one who represented Northeast India, really actually Eastern India. But they, in the dialogue, of course, we were not mandated to talk about aspects of the track to dialogue, but the fact of the matter is they gave a lot of support and they actually carried out operations against the Indian insurgent groups in a place called Taka, which is in the west of the Chinwin River, where the headquarters of the NSA Kaplang, the Alpha, and some of them such other groups were billeted. So Operation Sunrise 1 and Operation Sunrise 2 were a success. They demolished the camps of the insurgent groups, which drove them, of course, willy-nilly into the hands of the Chinese because they moved closer to the China-Myanmar border. But after the 1st February 2021 military takeover, things did a 180-degree turn. How, you may ask? The Indian insurgent groups which were billeted in Myanmar and who were facing, fear of attacks by the Myanmar's army at our behest. As a matter of fact, there was a talk of a joint operation between the Indian armed forces and the Myanmar army also, and that would have sounded the death knell for the Indian insurgent groups, and our security concerns would have been over forever. And then we could have actually embarked on the ambitious project or the thing which have been touted for quite some time, that is the Act East policy. I think the economy of Northeast would have really seen a great boom as a result of reaching out to the tiger economies of Southeast Asia, all the way to Japan, as it were. Because first it was the Look East policy, which the Modi dispensation sort of transformed into the Act East policy. But I still remember, when B.T. Verghese inaugurated one of my best-selling books, Frontier in Flames, Northeast India in Turmoil, in 2008 in the Indian Habitat Center. He said, Jaideep, when he was making his when he released my book, a huge crowd was gathered in the India Habitat Center in 2008, February, I think. He said, Jaideep, there's no point acting this unless you actually go east. Now, Myanmar is a linchpin from which we can actually go. Otherwise, we'll have to find alternate ways. And the Northeast is not in the radar at all. Now, after the first February military takeover, 2021, what happened? The insurgent groups, which had been attacked by the Myanmar's army, and we were in the process of actually seeing them being completely decimated. Decimated in the sense they would have come for dialogue process, which we began our discussion with, right? Battle fatigue, the fact that they are not being able to sustain themselves in the outland. I showed you a photograph that Myanmar Sagaing division is not particularly, hospitable by way of terrain, and COVID-19 added to their troubles. So we really, actually, at that point in time, had a lot of groups coming over ground.
So to speak, yes.
90% of the Alpha came over ground because they realized that there's no point in this so-called war against the Indian state. And COVID-19 and other aspects aided that particular, exercise. I might tell you, I have nothing to really hide. It was in this particular house, in this particular sofa, in my residence in Guwahati, that the then GOC of 3 Corps and the head of intelligence, I got them together and we worked out a plan when the army actually got feelers from the Alpha that, we can't sustain ourselves anymore by way of COVID-19, etc. And then we want to come over ground. So that opportunity was seized. But now what has happened is, these groups have got into an agreement with the Myanmar army. Why? Because there was a lot of protest after the imprisonment of Aung San Suu Kyi and the military takeover of the Tamado. And there's something called the People's Defense Force now, which is trying to fight the Myanmar army, the guerrilla hit and run, this, that, the other. So in order to quell the rebellion, they wanted the Indian insurgents. So they got into 180-degree turn, and they're using them now. Some sort of an agreement has come into place between the Indian insurgent groups, primarily the valley-based groups out of Manipur, and the Myanmar's army that said, all right, you continue to be here, we will give you safe haven, we will give you sustenance, but you help us quell this rebellion. So I think that doesn't augur well at all. And China naturally has perhaps been in the backroom boy in that sense, planning and aiding this process, because they are far better in these aspects. I've been to China in 2002, and I've been part of the track to dialogue with China in 2014. So I somewhat know their mindset and how they can sort of, think moves ahead. But as I was saying, at this point of time, because of the somewhat ambiguous policy that New Delhi it doesn't know what Myanmar policy should be. Recently, I had written an article in the Indian Express, which came out, I think, just on the 25th, actually, of this month, along with General Arun Sani, who was also a GOC of the 3 Corps and later on Army Commander in the Southwestern Command, a very respected Army officer, retired, of course. Both of us wrote a piece in the Indian Express stating that we need to engage Myanmar. In fact, the title was Engage Myanmar, by which I meant that we cannot wait for democracy to return. Aung San Suu Kyi has been imprisoned, and military of Myanmar, unlike the Indian Army or Indian Armed Forces, they are almost like they are a political party unto themselves, or the political party. Even if they hold elections, they will ensure that NLD, or the National League for Democracy, will not be contesting. So much so that they will form a political party, a proxy political party, by which Senior General Maung Aung Hlaing will sort of convert himself to be a politician and get himself voted to be the president of Myanmar, which he always wanted to be. So we need to do business with whoever is in power in Naypyidaw. We can't wait for another 5 years for the Act East policy to take off. Economy will suffer. The security aspects are already suffering. We are now, in the midst of, in such a precarious condition. But our Indian Army, as I said, the attacks have been carried out from across Myanmar. We cannot carry out surgical strikes the way it was done once after the Chandela attack of 2015. The fact of the matter is, we now need to recalibrate our policy for the neighborhood. There was a very ambitious policy called the Neighborhood First policy, which was, expounded by the Modi government. But we don't see that really happening in any informal manner. I think our Neighborhood First policy has to be rethought, recalibrated in a major way. We're losing out even Nepal. We are losing out even Bangladesh, where Chinese inroads, robust inroads have been made. We lost out Sri Lanka. Chinese, using bad debts, have got the important ports of Hambantota and even the Colombo ports. Now, what's left with us? I think Bhutan is our only last friend and an ally. And even they, of course, I'm sure that Thimphu might have had some understanding with New Delhi before they went in for an MOU with China. But I can assure you that Beijing is trying its utmost to ensure that there is an alienation of all our neighbors from us. The string of pearls theory, which about a decade ago came into prominence, and at that point of time I thought it was something like a conspiracy theory, but it seems to have come out to be true. It's coming out to be true. Pakistan is already a friend and ally, always a friend and ally of China, our prime enemy. But Bangladesh, where we have a particular a friend and ally in Sheikh Hasina, and Bangladesh Awami League is the only party inside the Bangladesh Parliament, Songshot. The rest of the parties are outside. So when I visited Bangladesh again for a track 2, I still remember the International Affairs Advisor to Sheikh Hasina, Gohar Razvi, a very respected professor from Oxford, and he's now the advisor to Sheikh Hasina. He came to meet me quite secretly when I was staying in Dhaka Club, and he said, he told me amongst other things, he said, Jaideep, we have to create an opposition, because the opposition is not inside the parliament, inside the Songshot. So there is no, constructive opposition. They're all out in the streets. So we have to sort of, create an opposition, among other things. So I fear that we are putting all our eggs in one basket. So to answer your question, I think we need to recalibrate our Neighborhood First policy and focusedly about Myanmar. I think we need to act immediately. I allude to the Indian Express article, but the crux of the matter is we need to do business with whoever is in power in Epido, because we can't do anything about it anyway. We can't wait for the democracy to return. We've not seen, in fact, even the internal so-called protests and rebellions and other things are slowly petering out. What happened to our economy? What happened to our ambitious actist policy, which Mr. Verghese says there's no point acting this unless you go east, Jaideep? What happened to our security, architecture? China will continue to aid and sustain these insurgent groups who are using Myanmar as a launching pad for attacks in states like Nagaland and Manipur. We've seen that happening in the last couple of months, and I fear that unless we take a very concerted and a robust stand on this particular issue, we will be left out of the entire game. And China would have entered, as it has entered, Myanmar. Every aspect of Myanmar's, business and this, that, the other. There is a Chinese finger in every, Myanmar spy, as it were. Back to you.
So, I believe we're coming to the end of our time. Before we conclude, you coming back to insurgencies in the Northeast, starting with the Naga insurgency in particular, you described the need for a fresh start. What would you recommend to the current dispensation as far as a fresh start goes? What would be a good first step towards perhaps rectifying this situation?
Yes. I think, yes, it's unfortunate that a lot of time has passed in rhetoric and trying to sort of correct the wrongs of the past. The Naga insurgency, on to its 25th year of ceasefire, is not a sort of aspect which a mature democracy like India should have countenanced. But I think very simply, very briefly, I would say a magnanimous nation like India, which wants to incorporate the Northeast, the enchanted frontiers as I term it, into its nation-building enterprise, needs to go ahead with the peace process, with the peace dialogue, with charity, with the restoration of faith and goodwill. Much of it has been eroded because of what happened, which I've been telling you. So I think the fresh start needs to actually begin anew with the restoration of goodwill, with the restoration of faith and trust, to say that yes, we want you to be a part of the Indian dream. We want you to be a part of the nation building exercise. You are an integral part of the Indian system in every sense of the word. Just because you have a paltry sum of members of the parliament does not make you any less important. That messaging should be very, very clear, audible, and loud. Then only Northeast, whether it is bio-insurgency, whether you call it law and order, whether you call it the defense zone, will actually become emotionally integrated with the Northeast. By way of another recommendation, and quickly I'll end with that, I think you see institutions like the Northeast Council and the donor ministry, the development of Northeastern region, I think these were all sort of instituted with good intent. But the fact of the matter is, as far as security is concerned, which is almost real, you cannot say that development can happen without security or vice versa. There's the hen and the egg analogy, which comes first. You can't wait for development to happen before you do that, or you cannot start developing the Northeast before all the peaceful. Everything has to go hand in hand. But I think it's very important for you to have, which I myself have been trying to sort of, propound that should be something called the Northeast Security Council, which will very determinedly, focusedly look at the security aspects of the Northeast, beginning with border management, gun running, drugs, illegal migration, India-China boundary issue talks, even peace processes with belligerent groups, leaving the Northeast Council and the donor ministries to talk about development. So then you have, something in tandem, You don't have, don't have a problem which we are faced with now. For some reason or the other, Northeast Council and the donor ministry, of course, they're not empowered with the security aspects. It's a Ministry of Home Affairs sitting in Delhi, which have desk on the Northeast desk. But then, for some reason or the other, things have not worked out. So I have actually given a blueprint to the dispensation waiting. And I gave it to the Prime Ministerial candidate then, Mr. Elkan Bani, which I know has passed over to the new dispensation. The Northeast Council will act under the National Security Advisor in the Prime Minister's office, and naturally the headquarters would be in Delhi, but there would be a rotatory system where it will meet in all the 8 state capitals and then talk about security, as I said, for a range of issues, beginning with border management, peace talks, India-China boundary as far as the eastern sector is concerned, drugs, illegal migration, a whole gamut of things. I think we need a very, very, very dedicated system like that. I had drawn out a blueprint, and I'm not a very modest person, so I'm claiming that it is Jaideep Saikia's blueprint, the Northeast Security Council. I think combination of faith, restoration of goodwill and trust, and the unveiling of Northeast Security Council in this coming year. We have just begun 2022, and God willing, if the right moves were to be made by New Delhi, we will see a far more prosperous Northeast, which is very ably integrated into the Indian dream and becomes an able partner in the nation-building enterprise.
On that note, Mr. Jaideep Saikia, on behalf of all of us here at Global Order, thank you very much for your insights and your time.
Thank you so much, Ishan.